and welcome to Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Euler. I'm your host, Brad Wilder. Today, John Euler is here with a special guest all the way from the United Kingdom. Keith Jordan is here. He's from OurDuty.group. You can find their website and find out all the information. We're going to come right back with both of them right after these. Join Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Euler Sunday, August 17th at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as he hosts Unmasking the Trans Movement's free support group with special guest Tracy Shannon, Trans Widow. We connect you with those who have experience, connection, and understanding on the many topics that make up this disturbing ideology and answer any questions you may have. Protecting the most vulnerable, women and children. Unmasking the Trans Movement. For more info on guests, dates, and times, see us online at unmaskingthetransmovement.com. Welcome back to Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Euler. I'm your host, Brad Wilder. Today, John Euler sits down with Keith Jordan from, well, all the way across the pond. We're going to the UK, where Keith is very proud to feature a great website called OurDuty.group. They're going to discuss that and how Our Duty protects not only women, but children as well. John, Keith, welcome to the program. Great to have you both back on. We've got a lot to discuss today as there's just a lot happening within the trans movement over the last little while. And, you know, children do need a lot of protection in this day and age.
Well, Brad, thank you as always. And Keith Jordan, it is a privilege to have you on our program.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Well, you lead a fine organization called Our Duty. You and I have sort of interacted afar on social media. I have seen your posts, and I knew this. You were somebody I eventually needed to reach out to get you on the program because your heart matches ours. You are protecting women and children, you know, the most vulnerable among us. And that's important for us all to say right at the outset that we are not anti anything. We are pro the protection of women and children. And Keith, with your organization, you all have a stellar track record, and you serve as a tremendous resource for parents, especially parents and young people, but parents who have found that their young people that have become confused, that are potentially groomed, are starting to be transitioned. So talk to us about your group over in the UK, but it's not just over in the UK. You are international. You have groups in Australia and the US. So welcome, and tell us about the history and your heart and what got Our Duty started.
Wow, thank you. So back in probably early 2018, I was struggling with this particular situation myself. It had visited me, and I was trying to research what information was out there, and there wasn't very much back then. There was Fourth Wave Now, which is an American website, and Transgender Trend, which is a UK website. And I reached out to Stephanie Davies-Arai, who is the director of Transgender Trend, and I asked her whether there was any support for parents going through this. And we had a discussion, and their organisation wasn't geared up to do the kind of support I had in mind, which was to build a community for parent peer support, which is where parents help each other get through this, sharing tips, emotional support, shoulders to cry on, all that sort of thing. So I started to build a group out on Twitter initially, and it grew, and we had our first real life meeting in December 2018, and it grew further, and by the end of 2019 we went to the Detransition conference in Manchester. We had grown a little bit too fast, so we split off in sort of two directions. Those of us who'd been with the group from the outset took an approach that we weren't really going to turn anyone down, which is how we became international. We just could not bring ourselves, having had the experience for so long of what parents go through, we just could not turn people down. So when people were coming to us from the US, particularly. We just brought them in. So by early 2020, we established a chapter in California and one in New York. And we added activism to our remit. So our relationship with the California group initially started when they said, "Oh, we just need some air cover to advertise Abigail Shrier's book, Irreversible Damage, and you're an established organisation. Can we put it up in your name?" And obviously, I said yes. So they put a big billboard outside the Kaiser Permanente Hospital in Los Angeles, which didn't last long. It was taken down, subject to lots of protests and pressure. But that really kicked off awareness, I think, of what was going on the West Coast along with Abigail's book. And since then, really, we've just gone about our business of supporting parents, trying to make as much noise as we can. So here we are 5 years later, pretty much doing the same thing, really.
Well, this is a perfect moment for us to, I'm going to share the screen here, and I'm going to help parents know where they can find you. So here is your website. We'll bring that up. And then you have a Twitter page as well. So we're going to talk about the website. But even before that, I want to direct people or help people see how they can access your Twitter page. Let me see if it changes on the screen. Do you see that in front of you?
Yep, but that's fine.
There we go. Okay, so this is your Twitter page. If anybody wants to know how to find you, right? As a matter of fact, it's down here. Our Duty Group is your Twitter handle, I guess, or whatever. Okay, and so you've got 8,300 followers. It's beautiful. And what happened recently, Keith, you and I had kind of interacted briefly just through different messages, but I noticed that you have pinned to your page something that was very intriguing.
Oh, that'll be on my personal page, John, I think, is the one that you're referring to, and you're looking at me.
Okay. Now, where do I find that one? Oh, that's right. Okay. I'm sorry about that. I've got two of them. That's right. So this is Our Duty page. Sorry about that. And there we go. Now you can tell. Hopefully, I'm a better therapist than I am tech guy. Okay. So this is your personal page. So you have two, and on your personal page. And so I encourage every parent to go on to both, because this is what I saw. So thank you for redirecting me here. So that, here I see you started out by saying, so this is pinned to your personal page, Dad, and ROGD stands for Rapid Onset Gender Dysphoria, right? I've been working with families of kids who think they're transgender for 4 years, and what I have learned, and you start to go down a magnificent, this is like bullet point by bullet point. So let's first talk about your website. Then we're going to come back to this because I want to be able to direct people to your tremendous resource. So I'm going to go back to the website. Tell us about what we need to know about this website. And then we're also going to review a chart in part 2 that you all have put together, a tremendous flow chart to help parents understand, really once a kid starts to get sucked into this, the course of what happens. So what should people know about this website?
The first thing is it's a work in progress. So we tried to put as much information and current news up there as we can. It's a struggle, frankly, because we're a little under-resourced in writers and editors to actually add content to it. But that which is there, we have received some good feedback about. There is information on approaches that you can take, primarily geared around good old-fashioned parenting, because ultimately, if you're going to get your child who thinks that they're transgender to stop thinking that they're transgender, that tends to be the key ingredient. Good old-fashioned parenting.
And what we're going to do, I'll do a promo for part 2. We're going to look at this chart. I'll even enlarge it at this moment. We're not going to go into it at this moment, but this will be a teaser, because people need to understand there really is an entrance and an exit, or a flow that we should say. So you've done a tremendous job. We're going to look at that, the second part of our program. But you have such information, such valuable information on your site that, again, I really want people to understand what is available to them from your organization. So you've got tabs, you've got sub-tabs. You're dealing with information that every parent should know, because you all have been through the ringer with all of this. I'm gonna bring full page back, or full screen back to us. Then we'll go back to what's on your personal Twitter page, and we'll go line item by line item, or bullet point by bullet point. So talk to us. What's accessible to parents on your site?
So primarily it's from the education pages. We try and produce as much fact-based or evidence-based information that we can, to challenge some of the things that they might be hearing about in broader society, or even if you just search on Google, the results that you get can't really be trusted, insofar as they tend to present just the affirmative model, so it's called, of gender-affirming care, which is a horrible euphemism for encouraging children to reject their sex and get medicalized accordingly. And that is something that we want to see an end to. No child needs a sex change.
Right. And for those that are unfamiliar with Tavistock, review that situation, because it really has sent shockwaves through, and it started kind of in earnest in the UK. There was an influence, but because things are starting to be clamped down, it's sending good shockwaves. So for those parents abroad that aren't all that familiar with the UK system, describe what recently has happened.
Right, so the story of the Tavistock, the Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust Gender Identity Development Service is the full name of the unit that has now been ordered to close. Technically, it's still running, but they're not accepting new patients. And the history of it is that was the gender clinic for children in the UK, and there was only that one. It did have an arm in the north of England and one in Scotland, but basically everything came out of the London centre. And in about 2005, I think it was, some of the people working there realised that what they were doing was not really that ethical. The children were being put on an affirmative pathway, which basically meant that they would end up being given puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and ultimately life-changing surgeries.
Matter of fact, Keith, I'm sorry to interrupt. What I'll do is I'm going to screen share again. I'm going to bring up on your site, you have a link. So as you're describing this, people then can read more about this, because I want people to know. So here we are on your site again, Our Duty. What you're describing is over on the right. If people want to learn more about Tavistock.
Yeah, I think all they can use is the search feature on the top right-hand corner of the screen.
Okay, and so there is a call for an independent inquiry.
So that's in Australia, the Queensland Children's Hospital.
Okay.
So there's lots going on around the world, and we try and report on it as best we can. When we find out of these sorts of developments where hopefully the hospitals in Australia and in the United States and in Canada and all over, all the hospitals that are practicing this so-called gender-affirming care stop doing what they're doing, because they're medicalising children unnecessarily, and it's deeply unethical. And the harm that it does to young people, adolescents, is permanent harm. Even if they desist before they're actually given the hormones, they've done themselves deep psychological harm in thinking of themselves as the opposite sex for a number of years. They've missed out on key development part of their lives. The late teens, early 20s, that's when you're meant to be going out, having fun, finding out who you are, building the network that's going to make your career, and all these sorts of things. And instead, there are people who are just entirely preoccupied with pretending to be the opposite sex. So even the unmedicalized, their lives are wrecked.
That is such a powerful point. Here, I've asked you more about your website. We're conflicted because of time constraints, but are you okay if I'm going to go back to screen sharing here. Let's get into right now the post. That's a perfect segue into, because you just started to express your concern about the medical pathways or the psychological pathways. So are you okay in sharing the history on your own Twitter page, this series of posts that you said Jordan Peterson himself commented on, and you've gotten a lot of traction, and I'm very appreciative of that. So tell us, set this up for us, and then we're going to walk kind of post by post. How's that?
Okay, yeah, let's do that. I put this out in January, and as you said, Jordan Peterson retweeted it, so it enabled far more people to see what I was saying than would otherwise be the case. So thank you, Jordan. And what I was trying to say was, who's to blame for what's happening here? All through my management career, it was always, we shouldn't blame people. We want a blame-free environment, but really, kids are being harmed, and people are to blame. And the first,
we'll go back and forth. As we talk, we'll kind of go full screen again back. So here we are. So that's your first.
So the first tweet was really to describe how children are entrapped into this belief system through online social media communities like Tumblr or Instagram or TikTok. Your teenager will go to these websites initially thinking, there's somebody who likes the same art that I like. And so they'll start talking to these people. And they'll build a community, but that community will start reinforcing these woke ideas, or that they'll reinforce their feelings rather than facts. So you end up with children who end up self-harming. If you remember the big self-harming craze about 10 years ago, well, that's sort of still going on. It hasn't completely disappeared, but it got replaced by the craze to be transgender, to think of yourself as being of the opposite sex or non-binary. And it's purely from, you call it peer contagion, which is what Lisa Littman mentioned in her paper on rapid onset gender dysphoria in 2018. It's that writ large. You can actually see it happening in real time if you were there at the time on Tumblr looking at the website. And as with all technology, it sort of evolves and moves on. So now I think the main vector for transmitting the idea that you might be transgender is probably TikTok. But there's lots of other ways that children are getting these ideas. I think on the second tweet I mentioned the chat rooms that they have built into these online gaming systems. So, massively multiplayer online role-playing games, I think they're called. so like Roblox, Fortnite. Kids can chat to each other behind the scenes here. So even if a parent thinks they're switched on enough to block TikTok and Tumblr and Facebook on the home router, and they think that gaming's okay, it still provides a backdoor for children to talk about these issues in an unmonitored space. And I don't know, there's something about young teenagers that when they're going through this development phase of forming friendships break apart and get stuck back together again in all sorts of different ways when kids are about 13, 14, 15. And it's brutal. You know, the bullying that goes on at that age to separate out whether you're in the in crowd or whether you're in the out crowd is absolutely brutal, and it takes its toll. And we're living in an environment where children are made to feel anxious by all these stories about impending doom from climate change. Obviously, COVID didn't help matters in increasing anxiety and depression amongst teenagers. But there's all these contributory factors that are making children susceptible to finding a tribe that is not a healthy tribe. And when they find that unhealthy tribe, they are at very severe risk of falling into believing themselves to be transgender. It just requires somebody to say, well, maybe you're trans. And it could be for any reason, whether they're...
So, Keith, it's not just the children either. It's the parents as well that are being drawn into this as well. And they've got the same ideology going on within their own heads. They want to be accepting. They want to try to, do the right thing for their kid. But the reality is that they're going down that same deviant path, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. If you're a parent and you go and do your research online, in the UK, you'll be presented with the website for mermaids, which say, yes, you must affirm your child and book them into the gender clinic. No. I'm sure it's the same in the United States. If you try and say, I want help for my kid who thinks they're transgender, the internet search engines will direct parents not to our website, which is evidence-based, but to websites that say, sign up here and you're LGBTQ plus, and it's a TQ plus bit which is the problem, because what we've got to remember is a lot of the kids, probably about 80% of them who end up being convinced that they're transgender, will probably grow up to be healthy LGB kids if they were left to their own devices.
Right.
That's great. That's what we want. We'd rather have that than the TQ plus people getting their claws into them and telling them they need hormones and surgeries to be somebody that they're not. But the internet search engines, they will not direct parents to us. They'll direct parents to the Trevor Project, I think it is in the States, of GLAAD.
That's right. Keith, when you mentioned they grow up to be healthy LGBT kids, let me just kind of qualify. When you're saying healthy, meaning not physically scarred or, because you're adding insult to injury. With my background with predators, what I want people to also think about is if a child ends up prior to adolescence, if they have a sexual thought, so to speak, like Kinsey said, children are sexual from birth. I want parents to realize more than likely, right, because kids will normally stay with anatomy. You have little boys, little girls, they just momentarily will, notice each other's differences and they'll move on. They won't give it a second thought. But if you have a child that, as they're growing up, starts to become unusually fixated, for lack of a better term, or unusually pondering about sexualized content or images or ideas, you're probably dealing with a kid that has been groomed, if not perpetrated against. But as far as when you say healthy gay or lesbian. We're talking they're not going to be sliced up, they're not going to be scarred. You're not adding all this confusion.
Absolutely, yeah. They're growing up to be, who they were destined to be, rather than who the social justice warriors are trying to make them. You make a very, very good point there. Obviously, kids will be kids, and kids will play doctors and nurses was a euphemistic way that we describe healthy discovery, because it's age equal, isn't it? And it's where you've got age disparities and power disparities where things go horribly wrong. And when parents come to us for support and they tell us about the stories that they have been through that led their child to start thinking that they're transgender, there's a whole list of things that we call susceptibilities, and other people will call comorbidities of transgender ideation. And sexual abuse is one of them. Physical abuse is one. Prior trauma, which could be, a messy divorce of the parents. And we've got neurodiversity, and we've got autism, and we've got attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So there's a whole load of factors.
The porn industry too, right, Keith? The porn industry is being the most deviant of all of them at this point, in terms of what John and I have discussed on many of occasions.
Yeah, something like 70% of 13-year-olds have seen pornography. And that's shocking. And that is going to sexualize them, and it's going to give them a perverted view of what sex is and what the expectations on them might be.
And then all the books in schools, you referenced that as well, that now we're hypersexualizing kids with all these books from the trans deceptions, sex ed material. So there's so many different factors that are being brought to bear on these kids to influence them, to unduly influence them in a direction that these predators, the financial and sexual predators, agenda-driven individuals, want these kids to eventually get on to that moving sidewalk of transition.
One thing about kids is they always want to experiment and try new things. That's what being a kid is all about. The problem is now that this ideology is getting into their heads, and it doesn't deserve to be there. And that is where this has all gone sideways. Kids should be able to experiment, try new things, figure out what they do well, what they don't do well, but sexuality shouldn't be included in that whole realm of what being a child is at all, period.
Yeah, some children sort of know what they are in terms of sexuality. Let's differentiate sexuality from or the other things that we're worried about, which is external forces of sexuality. People start to develop a knowledge of who they are, and sometimes from a young age. But it's these external forces that are trying to take who they are and turn it into something else. And why on earth they're doing it, and what their interests are in trying to change people, I have no idea. But it's these external factors trying to make people something else that I find most disturbing.
Well, Keith, we've barely scratched the surface here. We've gotten to number 2 bullet point. Let's quickly talk the third bullet point, or on your post on your personal Twitter page. It has to do with the cult-like dynamic. That'll be a perfect segue to the chart that you're going to unpack for us, that Our Duty has put together to help parents understand that there really is a flow, and you've put together a flow chart to help parents understand these different points that they can effectively intervene during these intersections, so to speak. But speak briefly to the cult-like dynamic of those pushing the trans movement.
So one of the classic techniques for bringing people into a cult is what they call love bombing. So once a child is being groomed in these online spaces, or maybe at school by an LGB allies group, they will love bomb them. Yeah, oh, you're trans. You're so lovely. You're so special, and they big up the child with this fake affection. So that's one aspect of cult like treatment that the children will get. You have to forgive me. I haven't got all the cult stuff fresh in my mind at the moment, but
well, the one especially dividing parent and child, they're very adept at doing that.
Yes, yeah. There's this encouragement to say, oh well, your parents don't love you. They don't care about you. Come and join us. This whole idea of the glitter family. And there was even a national clothing store in the UK called Primark that was actually promoting in their shop windows the idea of these alternate families that people can. That the groomers are telling our children to go to get away from their parents. I mean, this is how deep the ideology has gotten into the corporate world, and there's a whole load of things we could talk about on that subject as well.
And Eve, I just thought of in California. So in the States, California passed a law. They're calling themselves a trans sanctuary city. That if a child, so they're really encouraging children who have been groomed by, recruited by, pulled in by these cult-like methods. You can have an adult that's been grooming a kid online, as you indicated, the online gaming. So now they've wedged in between parent and child. This is always happening without the parent's knowledge. Now in schools, right, the grooming is taking place. If a kid runs away, that used to be against the law if you're harboring a child that's run away. But in the States, you can take that child. So now you've received a child into their home. You can drive them to California, and the parents can't do anything. And then in California, under Kaiser Permanente, and Chloe, right, went through, unfortunately, all her sex change, and she's filing suit against Kaiser Permanente. And shame on Kaiser Permanente. They're the one that put out the ACEs, the Adversive Childhood Experiences study. So talk about, they're now, Kaiser Permanente's turning a blind eye to all the indicators of trauma. Now they're slicing off young kids' breasts. But you can take that child across state lines into California, and the parents can't do anything about it.
Yeah, the whole sanctuary state idea is absolutely horrific, and Scott Wiener, he's the governor there. I cannot comprehend what his motivations are for.
Well, it's Newsom, and you wouldn't, right? Newsom is the governor of California, but Scott Wiener's the guy. How do you like that last name? He's the guy that's been pushing all these bills. He's from San Francisco, right? Probably close to Nancy Pelosi's district.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me so cross that they cannot see what they are doing. They are facilitating the predation on our children by the TQ plus movement to drag them into this cult of transgenderism.
Or maybe they do know. Keith, are you able to stay with us for part 2? We're going to do a part 2.
Brilliant. Yep, sure thing.
There we go, because we're going to then get into a couple more of the bullet points that you've listed on your Twitter page. On your page, Our Duty, we recommend people go to that, and then we're going to let you walk us through this flow chart that is extremely informative that parents need to understand to really get a good bird's eye view of how this trans movement, where it leads, and what points can possible intervention happen, as well as where are the danger points. So we're going to review that chart on part 2 of this important episode.
Thank you very much, both of you, for being here for part 1. This is Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Euler. Keith will be back for part 2 in just a bit. We recommend you check out our website at unmaskingthetransmovement.com. You can find us on BitChute as well as Rumble and YouTube with all of our episodes. Till next time, I'm Brad Wilder saying remember, it's not our kids' fight, it's our fight. I'll see you next time.